importantes de geopolítica. Y realmente tenemos el enorme privilegio de contar con la presencia de dos grandes amigos de esta institución y dos brillantes analistas. Me permitiré presentarlos muy brevemente. La manera en que vamos a conducir esta sesión va a ser que Alan Stoga va a darnos una presentación con su análisis sobre la situación de la geopolítica internacional, y posteriormente Jorge Suárez-Vélez va a comentar esta presentación, añadiendo sus propios comentarios, aterrizándolos un poco más al contexto de México. Así que, si me permiten, les voy a presentar Alan Stoga. Estoy seguro que la mayoría de ustedes lo conocen. Es un estratega, emprendedor, con una enorme experiencia en geopolítica, en comunicaciones, relaciones públicas, con consultoría, medios digitales, banca, gobierno. Actualmente es el presidente ejecutivo de la Fundación Tällberg, una fundación basada en Suecia, que busca promover un liderazgo global basado en valores, una nueva forma de pensar sobre los mayores desafíos que enfrentamos en el siglo XXI. Alan anteriormente fue presidente de Semi Communications, una firma en Nueva York basada en análisis geopolítico, y fue anteriormente el director general de Kissinger Associates, una firma de consultoría fundada, por supuesto, por Henry Kissinger. Tiene un enorme responsabilidades. Funcionó como economista en jefe para el presidente, para la Comisión Nacional bipartisana, del presidente Reagan. Es miembro del consejo del Agora Institute de Johns Hopkins University, así como del Council of Foreign Relations. Tiene grados en economía y estudios internacionales de Michigan State y Yale. Y por supuesto presento también a Jorge Suárez, quien es CEO y socio fundador de American Partners International. Jorge, desde 2017 ha sido contribuido, como saben, columnista para el periódico Reforma, escribiendo sobre temas políticos y económicos. Autor de los libros La próxima gran caída de la economía mundial en 2011 y en 2014, Ahora o nunca, la gran oportunidad en México para crecer. Jorge es economista del ITAM, con diplomados de Lausanne en Suiza, y vale la pena mencionar que desde 2012 fundó y copreside la Asociación de Profesionistas y Empresarios Mexicanos en Nueva York. Dado que esta sesión tiene la intención de establecer un diálogo entre nuestros dos panelistas, la vamos a conducir plenamente en inglés. Jorge, gracias. Alan, Jorge, it's a great privilege to have you this morning with us. So on behalf of all the ITAM community, thank you. Thank you very much. Los dejo, señores. Gracias.
Thank you, Alejandro, but I want to go on record as saying that took 4 minutes. So we get 4 minutes back at the end. Oops. 4 minutes back at the end of this. But before I start, I want to thank Arturo for the invitation. I am a huge fan of what you do at ITAM. I think it's one of the great institutions in the Western Hemisphere. I would that we had more of them in the United States, but that's an issue we can talk about some other day. And I want to congratulate you. I have not seen this many ties in a room. I didn't think they still existed anymore. So you must be serious people. That doesn't carry over to serious people, but what I want to do today, very briefly, think of this as a novella. It has a prologue, it has 3 chapters and an epilogue. And the prologue is this. A couple months ago, I realized to my horror that Donald Trump is probably the most consequential American president since FDR in terms of impact on the country, impact on the globe. The more I thought about that, I think he is also probably the most consequential global leader since Stalin. Now, the good news is both of those people are around a lot longer than I think the Donald is going to be around. But think about how many times, we should have had AI counting, how many times the word Trump has been used so far today. It really is shaping everybody's reality, good, bad, and I would argue mostly ugly, as I will in a minute. So, chapter 1, though, I think we have to talk about context. She wants me to talk directly into the mic. That requires bending. Okay, is that better? I have to stand over here because the mic is not cooperating. They have a cute little picture here of someone talking into a mic, which ITAM is prepared for all things. We live at a moment when everything we know is changing. We all grew up in a world where yesterday was always the best predictor of tomorrow. No longer the case. I think these are the 4 dominant boxes that are changing everything we know. Everybody else has their own. We're moving into a period of global disorder. We no longer have market capitalism, long since gone with the wind. Institutional decay, we've been letting our institutions erode for decades now. We're actively now taking them apart. We're destroying those institutions. And finally, the technological transformation, how we communicate, how we think, literally the nature of life. People try to compare it to the wheel or the automobile. No. This technology is fundamentally changing who we are as human beings, and that's never happened before. Secondly, has globalization topped out? The answer is yes. It's also changing in character. This is, of course, a measure of exports, which is the worst way to think about globalization. Globalization is a mindset. It is about how you think about the world. Do you think in global terms, or do you think in local terms or regional terms? For a while, we were thinking in global terms. Think about the UNFCCC. The only way you can address climate change is as a global phenomenon. How'd that work out? So you see an issue after issue that's not just on trade, which is a simple measure. We simply aren't, we're moving away from a global narrative into something else. Economic nationalism. So we all know Trump is a mercantilist. I would argue he's sort of a reincarnation of a 18th, 19th century British imperialist mercantilist. If you want to describe him in a few phrases, that's who he is. But he didn't invent this stuff. This has been going on for a while. This is everywhere around the world. We're not breaking down trade barriers, we're creating trade barriers. And when I say we, I don't just mean we, the United States, I mean we, most countries. Think about what happened on the 1st of January. The Europeans put in place the carbon border tax. I understand it's all about the environment, but it is also a huge disincentive to trading with Europe. Multilateralism. Multilateralism is for the South, not the North. That's a brutal fact. This is something that the UN does. They monitor multilateralism based on how supportive you are as a nation of multilateral initiatives. On a scale of 1 to 100, the United States now ranks 5, not number 5, 5 out of 100, the lowest rank on the planet. And you can see who supports multilateralism. Of course, the Global South does, because that was the opportunity to integrate into a different world. But this multilateralism as we knew it is a thing of the past. Liberal democracy is fading. Any measure of democracy anywhere in the world, we're worse off than we were 5 or 10 years ago. This happens to be Freedom House. They have a particular bias in their numbers, but any other measure you want, you're going to get the same outcome. Violence. It is becoming a violent world. The top slide is the ACLED data. If you don't know ACLED and you follow conflict, it's the best source on the planet at the moment. And what they look at is literally the number of violent events, very particular definitions, et cetera. Look at Latin America. Look at Mexico. We like to think of our hemisphere as being at peace because we don't have wars between states. From a violence point of view, in terms of impact on people, there is no peace in the Americas. Bottom is organized crime, and that, of course, is Latin America's problem, Mexico's problem. That the violence is organized crime. The violence in Africa is not organized crime, it's other kinds of things. But it's a violent world, and it's becoming more violent literally every year. If you count the incidents, never mind, read the headlines. Consequence, fragile states. More and more countries by almost any definition of what you mean by fragile, aren't stable, have the potential to tip into something quite nasty. Again, pattern throughout Latin America, Mexico, Africa. It's the North that's stable. It's the South that is unstable because the system isn't supporting the South anymore, neither in economics, nor in politics, nor in military terms. Chapter 2, Trump triumphant. As some of you know, I've written speeches for a lot of people in my career. I can't imagine writing those words. It would embarrass me as a speechwriter to have written those words. These are Trump words. These actually specifically come from the introduction to the National Security Strategy. Trump believes those words. Trump's White House believes those words. No one in this room believes those words, including me, but that's not the point. The point is that he does. And that becomes really quite important because he is that consequential. So I'm going to try to do, there's that famous line from Julius Caesar, Mark Antony says, I come not to praise, but to bury Caesar. Well, I don't come to bury Trump. I don't come to praise Trump. I come to try to explain Trump because I think it's a phenomenon that we have to cope with. We'll see how I do. Here's how Trump and Trump's government looks at the world. A firm belief that larger, richer, stronger is what matters. This is so fundamentally different from everything we built post-45, but it's actually official doctrine now, but it is also precisely how the Chinese look at the world, it's how the Russians look at the world. It's not a surprise, it is a surprise that we look at the world that way now, but now that you have the, quote, great powers, an old concept come back, looking at the world that same way, that becomes a problem. The Europeans are trying to figure out whether they're allies or not. The answer is no. We don't. We're back to the day. Remember the great quote, the Clausewitz quote, nations have interests, not friends. This is precisely, the Americans have been behaving that way for a long time. We've now made it official. So they're not, if you talk to European leaders, they don't know what will we do under what circumstances. And that strategic ambiguity, which is good if it's aimed at your enemies, is not good if it's aimed at your friends. I would argue the same is true here in Mexico. You have no idea what we will do or not do. We're going to talk in a moment about today's meme floating around the internet about whether or not we're about to bomb Mexico. Turns out he did say something like that last night, but we'll get there. The Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, we all hear about that. The real question you're asking is why did the United States do what they did this past weekend? And I've been asked it a number of times today, the last several days. I think there's 4 reasons. He did it because he could do it. And don't underestimate the importance of that in the way that they look at the world. Secondly, Trump has an old-fashioned mindset when it comes to oil and to minerals. He wants more of that, and he thinks that is a source of national wealth. Thirdly, he knew no one anywhere would defend Maduro. No one has stood up and said, you can't do this to Venezuela, some are saying. Nobody's saying you can't do this to Maduro. So it was a free shot. It's like an open goal, and there's no goalie there from his point of view. And finally, because he expects everyone in the Americas to be terrorized. That is the point of the exercise. It's to persuade governments all over this hemisphere that I can and will do anything I need to do. I would argue, you've just been talking about the negotiations this year over the trilateral agreement. I think this was the opening shot of the negotiations. I think he just told you how the U.S. is going to enter into these kinds of negotiations. I'm not arguing it's pretty, I'm not defending it, I'm trying to explain it. What are the consequences? The thing that I'm going to talk a little bit later, what keeps me up at night, but the thing that I really worry about is accidents. The world in which we have now entered is accident-prone. It is astounding that nothing truly disastrous has happened. Think about that Venezuelan tanker that we grabbed with a Russian submarine following it, because it was a Russian flag tanker. Can you imagine, and you can imagine the movie. In the movie, the guy running the submarine says, "I can't let that happen to my colors," and takes a whack at the Coast Guard plane. It didn't happen, thank God. But we're in a world where accidents are sooner or later going to start happening because things are going bump in the night. When things go bump in the night, there's currently, you mentioned it earlier, I think, there's a huge fight going on between the Japanese and the Chinese. Chinese are starting to squeeze Japan. Korea has volunteered to help the Chinese side of that, which is sort of a fascinating read of how geopolitics is working in Asia. But the elevated risk is a serious issue, and by definition, they're all black swans. I mean, there's just black swans everywhere you look. I'll get to some of mine in a minute. So it's a new world order. It's becoming a new world order. Keeping track of what the U.S. is doing or not doing, this is one effort that I made. What's out? As you may know, 2 days ago, we've published a list of 66 UN-related organizations that we were leaving or not paying our dues or just ignoring. You can debate some of this. The in for now, I'm not sure. If I were a betting man, would I bet that NATO's around 5 years from now? No, I would not make that bet. Would I bet that we are still an active, aggressive member of the World Bank and the IMF? Not so sure. Can't tell you, can't prove it, but I can tell you that there's a reshuffling of all of this going on, and you start to ask the question of how do these institutions function if the United States is not there? I haven't asked that question since '45. The Chinese have long since answered that. They've built a parallel set of organizations. They have their own banks, they have their own funds, they have they've put in place an alternative. One of the reasons they did that, and the precursor to this, when President Obama was president, President Xi had recently come into office, the Chinese asked the Americans for a summit. And the Chinese said, "We'll come to you," which the Chinese never, ever offer. "We'll come to you. We don't want to go to Washington because then you're going to do all these parties and stuff. We want a shirt-sleeve summit," their phrase. And that summit was held at the Annenberg Estate in California. And the Chinese show up and they say, "Look, the Thucydides trap stuff. We are the rising power, you're the legacy power. Every time in the history of civilization, and if you've ever negotiated with the Chinese, you get the whole history of civilization every time. Every time in the history of civilization, that's led to conflict. We think we're smarter. We know we're smarter. We think you're smarter. We can find a way to do something different." And they proposed a new world order. They said, we want a new great power relationship. And this was it was essentially a US-China condominium. It's the old concept of a condominium. Over the course of the conversations, the Chinese said, "We'll give you an example of what we would bring to the party." And they said, this is back with President Obama's president. They said, "We know you are very concerned with nuclear weapons on the Korean Peninsula. At that time, the American nukes had long since been pulled out, and the ships that visited there had no nukes on them. So they were obviously talking about North Korean nuclear program." They said, "No problem, done, solved. Don't ask us how, they'll be gone quickly." We said, "Great, cool." A little later, we obviously said, "Well, what do you want from us? Give us an example of what would work in this new world order." And the answer they gave was, "Well, you have a bilateral treaty with Japan. You are under treaty obligation to go to war if Japan is attacked. We can tell you right here and now, we are the only power that can attack Japan, and we will never do it." Now you can say, "Why should I believe you?" And their answer is, "We've been neighbors for 5,000 years. We've never attacked Japan. They've attacked us, but we've never attacked Japan. We're never going to do it. We're not going to have to, because that's not how Asia works. It'll work out through a system of tribute." We, of course, said, "Oh my God, treaties are," this is the old days, "treaties are sacred obligations. We cannot leave our Japanese friends." And the talks broke down and we didn't do anything. They have been pushing the Monroe Doctrine. They brought up the Monroe Doctrine. They said, we think this Monroe Doctrine thing is great. The Americas for America, perfect. Asia for the Asians. Notice what the South China Sea's middle name is. It's China. So why are you saying we can't dominate our region if by practice and history you dominate your region? So as soon as the Monroe Doctrine comes back, the Chinese have showed up and said, guys, this makes sense to us, no problem. In the good old days when we all were doing different kinds of things, economic tools were aimed at economic targets, commercial tools at commercial targets. There were everybody swam in their own lane. There was none of this swimming in circle stuff. What's changed is that there is an attitude in this administration where everything is available for everything. It's almost like that really bad movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once. That's how we look at it. So imagine a world where the U.S. says to Brazil, we're putting tariffs on because you put Bolsonaro in prison. The Brazilians are saying, what does tariffs have to do with Bolsonaro trying to commit a coup? Answer is, we don't care because we can do it. So there is this, and the problem, though, is that, remember when the Europeans agreed, when we had the Scottish summit, where Mr. Trump and Ms. van der Leyen agreed to a trade deal? They negotiated in about 55 minutes, but put that aside. My European friends were outraged. It's a horrible deal. We can't make this deal work. And I tried to assure them, don't worry about it. His deals last until sunset because he's going to start renegotiating again. And it's that bottom line. In the WTO framework, you negotiate a certain way towards certain objectives, you agree, and then you move on. In his framework, that's what you do. With a constant iteration of escalations, more demands, more requirements, and it's never, ever, ever over. There is no period at the end of a Trump sentence. It's like Ulysses. They're endless paragraphs. The only point I want to make about tariffs is what amazed me about the world, and I learned from all of you, is that people celebrated the fact that he backed off of his 50% tariffs. So we go from 2% tariffs to whatever Yale thinks it is now, it's 18 or so, and everybody's fine with that. It's a dramatic change in the entire way we do trade, and people are comforted that, oh my God, it wasn't worse. And that's Trump's genius, is because he negotiates like a madman, and then you accept when he backs down and he's only half mad, and you say, great, look what we avoided. The thing about the American military, one very quick question, I don't know to dwell here. This is not Trump's military. He hasn't done a budget yet. There's been no change in Americans' global military stance, not anything other than better PR, different PR. It's now the Department of War, sort of, not the Department of Defense. But it's being used in a way, and it's dramatically different, and this is, I think, the important point. Trump is not W. Bush. He's not going to send the 82nd Airborne anywhere. He's not going to put boots on the ground. What he's going to do are these kinds of one-off, pinprick kind of things that are designed, as I said earlier, to terrorize, to get you wondering about what is he going to do next, and hopefully you'll just agree to whatever is being asked for. Now, he did just propose a 50% increase in the defense budget to $1.5 trillion. That's not going to happen. We don't have that money. But we're not going to be reducing defense spending. So, the big stick. This is good old-fashioned Teddy Roosevelt. I already told you why I think they did it. The real question, which is the question we're going to talk about a bit, what do the Americans want? By asking the question that way, which every government I know in the hemisphere is asking, you already lost the negotiation. Because you're already waiting for them to make the demand, and you're going to see around, what can I find a way to solve it? But negotiating with these guys is going to be even more difficult than it's always been to negotiate with the U.S. government. It is a very, and the key thing I think to think about is not just USMCA, what do the Americans really want in the Americas? They want less Chinese. So think about how we're selling to the world the Venezuelan oil grab that's underway. We're going to not let that oil be sold to the Chinese. The oil markets are fungible. It's a stupid concept to even put in those terms, but that's how they're thinking. Think about Huawei's investment in Mexico, Huawei's investment in Venezuela. Think about the Peruvian port that the Chinese built, which is a super port. I'd be willing to make a small bet that our agenda, the United States agenda, not my agenda, is rich in let's make a deal. And the deal is get rid of the Chinese. Now, you can't, who are the Brazilians going to sell soybeans to? But you can certainly be pressured on the investment side, on the infrastructure side, on the telecom side. And I think there's going to be a lot of pressure there, which I think is where all of this starts to go. That's a guess. It may be as wrong can be. Chapter 3. And you talked a bit about China in the last panel. All of this is sideshow. The real fundamental geopolitical axis is China and the U.S. Xi was right when he asked for that negotiation. Obama was probably wrong to have rejected it, and we are where we are. What did the Chinese learn from that rejection? They figured out that the Americans were delighted to be a legacy power, that they did not want to. Imagine a world where the G7 includes Italy. I was once the Italian desk officer in the U.S. Treasury. I love Italy. But the notion that Italy is in the G7 today is laughable. Italy in, no Brazil, no China, no India. So we've got, it is about the U.S. and China. And the Chinese figured that out. They figured out we were stuck in the past. They weren't going to change. They began building their own infrastructure, but they also did a number of other things. They started thinking about what is the world going to look like in the early 21st century, and what do we have to do to make sure that we are as powerful as we think we want to be and as we can be. They're not there yet. And we have this funny time problem. It's China's interest to delay confrontation. You all know the old Napoleon statement, when your enemy is making mistakes, never interrupt him. The Chinese certainly believe that about us. They also believe that they are in the process still of consolidating. They still have a second-rate Navy. They need more Navy. They in the tech side, they've got a lot of stuff coming, but it's not quite there. So their interest, they don't want a crisis now. They'll take one if they have to take one, but they don't want it now, I don't think. What's our best case, or at least Trump's best case? He's a mercantilist. He wants commercial detente. He wants a little more of what what you guys gave them here. He wants, you can have more of Asia. He's not thinking, he doesn't have, someone asked me about Rubio's vision. Rubio may or may not have visions. I'm not sure they're strategic visions about how the world works. They may be visions about how do I become president, which I'm sure he has. The Chinese have a best case. They at least want to dominate Asia without any problems. They do want to have remember they're the world's largest trading partner. What do we know about the world's largest trading nation? You always want the freest trade possible. That's why the Brits in their day were free traders. Us in our day were free traders. The Chinese are free traders, sort of, which is to say they want access. So they want access. We don't want a direct conflict. Every war game that's been done by everybody I know who does war games say that ends badly. You get to nuclear war real fast, regardless of what the scenario you're using. But where's it going to be fought out? I think it's going to be fought out in the tech space. And that's bad news for us. One of the things the Chinese did for the last 20 years is build their presence in the supply chains. And it's not just they have the mining. We don't do mines in the States. They're dirty. They have the smelting capacity. We don't do smelting in the United States. We ship lithium to the Chinese for them to smelt and send back to us. It's nuts. Unless you lived in a world where free trade really was going to be the dominant factor forever. And they said, fine, We don't care about dirty energy. We don't care about dirty mines. We don't care about dirty processing. We want those supply chains because we know they're essential to our futures as tech leaders. Get to that in a second. And we know we have you where we want you, which is to say, they own us, which is why you have seen only the Chinese stand up to Trump. And Trump has only backed down to the Chinese, because that's a reality that just exists. I apologize, this is hard to read. So the Australians constantly are monitoring relative positions in tech. In their calculus over the last 4 years, in the advanced info tech, that's how you read this, there's 7 subsectors. The Chinese lead in 7 of those. In advanced materials, they lead in 13 out of 13. And this is measured by the quality of scientific paper being done, being published, the quality of the research being done in the institutions. We are in second place, and our position is significant only in bio, although they are leading us in bio. China, and this is their future. Their present isn't bad, but this is where they're going in the future, and that's a challenge if you're the United States. Let's go to Taiwan. They're not going to invade Taiwan. I'm trying not to make very specific forecasts. This one's easy. Why would you blow up the fabs? You need the chips. So you're not going to blow it up. What you're going to do, this is a map of their recent war games, and that's where they deploy their ships. They're telling us they're going to blockade, which of course is what they do. And we'd have to break the blockade. 7,000 miles away. Can't do it. Can't be done. Those war games end equally badly. They will take Taiwan. They will not destroy Taiwan. The epilogue. This is a world which is unpredictable. If you're trying to run a business, I'm looking at Martinez Valle, wherever he is, how do you run a business when you have no idea what the prices are tomorrow, what the rules are the day after tomorrow, or who's in charge? So they're blackish swans. They're not real black swans. If I can imagine them by definition, not black swans. There's nothing you can't imagine that couldn't happen. And that, I think, is the real challenge and my real takeaway. And you can have the slide if you want, but that's a different point. Those are the 2 takeaways. And that's the world that we're going to talk about for the time we have left. We get another 3 minutes, remember. Reality is fantastic, but it's plausible. Fantasy, and it's the other way around. Fantasy must be plausible. Reality doesn't have to be plausible. That's the world we all grew up in. So let me leave you there.
Thank you so much, Alan. I think since we really don't have that much time, I think that there's probably many questions in the minds of our audience of things that you did not touch upon, but that I know you know a lot about them anyway. So let me try to ask some questions, and we take it from there. So. First one, I'll get to Mexico. I will get there because I think that's relevant. But some that I think are relevant. Let me start with a crazy one. Why Greenland? What is so? And my second part of that question would be, would this signal the effective death of NATO?
I'm not sure NATO is still alive. It's at least in the ICU, but that's a different point. Yes, of course, if we invade a NATO country, it probably puts paid to NATO. Why Greenland? I go back to why Venezuela. Because he can, or he thinks he can. Because it is about minerals. They have sort of the same geological footprint that the Canadians have. Nobody has any idea what's there. I've been to Greenland 3 or 4 times. Up on the ice, it's 2 miles of ice down to bedrock. Nobody knows what's down there. It's zero knowledge. Along the shore, along the western coast, there's some serious oil, some serious minerals, but it's mostly unknown. And if you look at a map, Greenland is in North America. And what did we say about the Monroe Doctrine? It's America for the Americans. I think it's that simple. I don't think it's going to happen. That's a different issue. But it hasn't gone away.
Let me move to a different region. I've been sort of surprised to see that Europe has not gone, like European banks have not gone after Russian assets because of Ukraine. Why do you think that is?
European banks have gone after Russian assets. What they haven't done, the Russian financial reserves are sitting at Euroclear. Euroclear is a Belgian company organized under Belgian law, which among other things means the directors of Euroclear are personally liable for anything that happens to assets in their bank. So the Europeans proposed to steal those assets. Russians are bad guys, they're under sanctions, they're doing evil things, let's take their money. That's illegal. And the EU said, yes, but it's there, and then we won't have to pay for it out of our budgets, we'll let the Russians pay for it. And the Belgians had no choice under their law because the Belgian government is also a shareholder. So they would be liable, personally liable, the Prime Minister in particular. So it can't happen. I would argue it's the same mistake we made. If you think the dollar as a reserve currency is important, then you want people to put dollars in American assets, in American institutions. You want them to buy property in New York and Los Angeles. You want to attract assets. When you start seizing assets because it violates a foreign policy, that tells everybody time to get out of Dodge. And you are seeing a systematic reduction in foreign holdings of all sorts of American assets, worried that they might be the next Russia. So I think I understand why Euroclear in particular didn't do what they do. I understand why the central bankers in Europe don't want that to happen. And I understand why the politicians who refuse, like all politicians these days, to consider trade-offs. Okay, we want to help Ukraine, we're going to have to spend less on something else. That trade-off politicians refuse to do. They don't do it here, they don't do it in my country, they don't do it in Europe.
Let me ask you for a comment on something. It's a bit unfair because something just came out, and Trump said that his own morality is the sole limit to his global power. Am I the only one alarmed by this statement?
I was amazed by the statement. That was in the context, I don't like to advertise the New York Times. Read the New York Times interview. 3 journalists had 4 hours with him 2 days ago, including an hour Petro calls. And he says, hey, you guys want to stay and listen? You can't talk and you can't report anything, but you can stay and listen. And they sat there and listened to Trump and Petro bouncing the ball back and forth. And in the course of that interview, he said not just that, he said all sorts of things that in a normal world, next stop is the funny farm. I mean, this is just crazy. There has been almost no reaction anywhere to any of the stuff in that interview, other than saying, I've had emails from friends all over the world, oh, we thought that's what he thought. So yeah, this is, it's the real Trump. Trump sees no reason. One of the good thing about Trump is he's 100% transparent. Can he lie? Yes, I'm not saying he can't lie, of course. But what you see is what you get. He has no governor in the sense, I've had clients around the world and you try to say, okay, here's the following things you cannot say under any circumstance. If you said that to Trump, those would be the first 4 things that he'd say because they'd be top of mind. And the reason I told him not to say it would be because it's a really bad idea to say it. So for a while I thought ignore what Trump says because it's nuts. Now I've realized, listen to what Trump said, not just because it's nuts, but because it's who he is. And he is this fabulously powerful person. I shouldn't talk about Mexican politics. AMLO personalized the presidency in ways that had not happened under his predecessors. Trump is doing the same thing, although in both cases, they built on the legacy of their predecessors. The United States hasn't declared war since 1942. Congress doesn't work in certain spaces. Everybody knows that. Everybody used it, Republican, Democrat. This guy uses it in ways that even the most cynical among us could ever have imagined anybody doing, and that phrase, that perfectly says it. He is amoral. Now, he's not immoral.
Let me ask one last question relative to the United States before asking you about Mexico. Quick question. How much weight does Marco Rubio actually have in U.S. foreign policy? Because there's been quite a number of contradictions in the Venezuela case. What is your opinion?
The context is important. Remember the first presidential debate in 2015 when there's got 17 Republican wannabes, including Trump and Marco Rubio. And it was one of those hot days. We've all been under lights where it's so hot on the stage, you're just dripping wet. Rubio is a sweater. Trump is not a sweater. That's an incredibly valuable thing in the public space. And so Rubio's pouring wet, and Trump looks at him and says, takes his water and pours it on the floor and says, "This is Lil Rubio." So Lil Rubio got this big. It was the end of his campaign. So he's owned by Trump in that macho kind of sense. Fast forward, he and everybody else genuflect, joined the government. And if you were to ask any pollster, they would tell you Vance or Rubio are the obvious successors to the president, since nobody thinks the president's going to run again, including his secretary, who actually knows. Rubio has been, notice that Vance has disappeared the last 2 weeks. Bessent's disappeared the last month. Rubio is suddenly the face of this thing. Now he should be. He's the foreign secretary and the national security advisor. Henry Kissinger just rolled over in his grave. Does he, and remember how important Cuba is to Rubio. It's in his DNA. His parents escaped Castro's Cuba. He grew up in that Florida hotbed of anti-Castro stuff. He promised he would free Cuba someday. So he's got skin in this particular game, which I think is why he's so visible. He's not negotiating with the Chinese. That's Bessent's job. He's nowhere near the Middle East negotiations. That's other people's jobs. And that's how Trump uses people. Nobody has their own portfolio. You go do that. And that's how it works. Will he be the next president of the United States? It'd surprise me, but I don't know.
Okay, let's get closer to Mexico. This question I have to think of Luis de la Calle before asking it. Sorry. Every time I give a talk, there's two questions that everyone asks me. Is it true that the United States needs Mexico in this economic confrontation with China? And that is basically what is going to save us.
The us is Mexico? The us is Mexico? No, it's actually what's going to bring down the wrath of Trump on you. I argued earlier, I genuinely think you're going to be asked to have some disinvestment, to shift some sourcing. Remember that at the start, remember it was Panama. We were going to take the Panama Canal back. And it boiled down into a negotiation with Hutchins Whampoa over two companies. They own one at each end of the canal. Those negotiations are still underway. They haven't finished yet. Partially they haven't finished because the Chinese are insisting on at least a large minority stake in the business, which is actually good economics. That's a different point. So the question is, remember what Trump said to Zelensky in that awful Oval Office interview? You have no cards, I have the cards. So his view of Mexico is he has the cards. So you're going to have to decide what cards you have, what pain you're ready to take, what you're willing to do under certain circumstances. So you told me about the quote running around the internet. Last night, Trump gave an interview to Hannity. The cartels are running Mexico. It's very sad to watch and sad to see what's happened to that country. Paragraph. We've knocked out 97% of the drugs coming in by water, and we're going to start hitting land with regard to the cartels. Now, the stock market's up today, everything's up today, that's just Trump talking. Maybe. He certainly, the wise thing that the Mexican government did, they wanted the cartel leaders out of the prisons. First president say, fine, you want them, they're yours. Question you should ask is, what information are they getting out of those guys, and what are they going to do with it? That, I think, it's probably a bad TV show, but it may be worse reality. So I don't know, he's told you what we want. We want nice neighbors. This is like Mr. Rogers on TV. We want friends. Friends on our terms. Friends who bring benefits, who don't ask for benefits. He's the one who, the renegotiated USMCA was not a disaster. What's the next one going to be like? I'm sure it's going to come down. Take a look at Chinese trade. Suddenly, trade from Mexico, Vietnam, and Indonesia is going through the roof to the United States. This is a duh kind of thing. He's going to go after that in the negotiations. The question is, will they do anything violent? Will they drop? Will they go? Someone asked me last night, what do you think the possibility of those Black Hawks showing up and grabbing a corrupt governor? And I said, oh my God, I'm not imaginative enough to even think about that. But imagine the consequences here if something like that happened, not just in a TV show, but in real honest-to-God life. And a bit like the Maduro thing, there's a lot of Venezuelans cheering. Thank God Maduro's gone. They're not so happy with what they're left with, but they're celebrating that. And that's part of the Trump genius, is he finds things that a lot of people will say, well, that's good. Yeah, we don't like the way you did it. We don't like who you are. You're a gringo, blah, blah, blah. But no Maduro, really cool. And that's what worries me about. I can't tell you what I think is going to happen bilaterally. I don't think it won't be intended to be bad, because he has this fantasy world where if we're happy, everybody's happy, which is the Venezuelan stuff. We're stealing all their oil, and we're going to give some of it back to them so they are wealthy. We're out of time, but we don't want to end there, but that is the world I think we've slipped into. Now, the question you haven't asked, will Trump be there forever? The answer, of course, is no. He is mortal, which does prove there is a God, but that's an entirely different point. But don't fall into the trap that this is one and done. This is not like one of those basketball players who shows up for a year and then goes on to fame in the NBA. There has been an important change in how America thinks about the world. There is no transatlantic elite anymore. I've been a member of the Council of Foreign Relations for decades. The conversations are fundamentally different than they used to be. And that frightens me. You don't see people standing up and trying to change this. You're not going to see the Democrats run on a platform of multilateralism. Not going to happen. And so not all of this will stick. The idiocy won't stick. But a lot of the directional stuff, I think, will stick. Partly, and the last point, partly because who are the two dominant powers in the world as it's evolving? China and the U.S. We are becoming China more than China's becoming the U.S. in terms of our mindset. And that is probably not surprising, but is frightening. Is that black enough?
We have to leave it there, but thank you so much, Ala. Very interesting.